Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to DHA's room this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jonathan Buckwell. I am a director at DHA Planning, and we are planning consultants covering Kent and indeed the whole of the wider southeast from our Maidstone and Crawley offices. So thank you for choosing to come to the DHA room this morning. What I'm looking to do over the next half an hour or so is just run through some of the changes that are expected to the planning system over the next few months and years. There's been a number of announcements this year, not least the planning white paper, which was released in the summer, which I'm going to be concentrating on this morning. Now, there's a lot of detail in the white paper that, to be honest, could fill several of these sessions over. So today, I'm just going to skip through some of the main points coming out of the consultation. And I will also be opening up for some questions towards the end of the presentation as well. So if you have any questions, please either hold on for a few minutes or put them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer some of those towards the end of the session. So, as I said, the planning white paper was released in August for consultation by the government. That consultation has just closed last week, and the government is now going through the various responses that it's received to that to decide what to do next. Now, the white paper sets out a number of different ideas for changing the planning system. They are very much ideas. And there's surprisingly little detail in parts of it to see exactly how everything will work, but certainly there are some interesting concepts which are worth talking about today. The key themes of the white paper are really the ones listed on the screen now. So first of all, there is what's being trailed in the papers really as a zoning system, although that phrase isn't actually used in the white paper itself. And the idea is that in future, local plans will designate land in one of three forms, either for growth, for renewal, or for protection. So growth being areas of major growth. This is where we're talking about significant settlement expansion or new settlements, new villages, new towns even. Renewal is more for existing urban areas and existing village areas where some sort of development might normally be expected to be acceptable. That could also include areas adjacent to existing towns and villages. And then protection being really everywhere else, green belts, areas of outstanding natural beauty, but also could be just general open countryside. And those are areas which in general terms should be protected from development, or at least from unacceptable development, in a not dissimilar way to at the moment, though it does depend exactly on some of the detail that works through there. The idea is that the planning system should be streamlined. There should be simpler local plans and faster planning decisions, increased digitisation of the planning process, and increased focus on design and sustainability. The reform of the developer contributions system, effectively ending Section 106 agreements and moving completely to a levy system, and also introducing binding housing requirements to increase housing delivery. So I'm just going to run through a few of those points in a bit more detail. So starting with simpler local plans, as I mentioned, the idea is to have a zoning system, but really the biggest change to local plans going forward is that they should just be about allocating and designating land. So the idea is that development management policies, which form a fairly significant portion of most local plans at the moment, they would effectively be nationalized. So these are the policies that control, for example, development in the green belt or development in the countryside in more general terms. And most authorities have broadly similar policies to each other, and really the government is saying that could all be set nationally. That would save an awful lot of debate at a local level, and a lot of time spent sort of poring over individual words in policies when those policies could just be set nationally. Now, it is a bit more complicated than that. It's certainly not the case that every council has identical development management policies at the moment. And one consequence of this could be that some authorities might want to choose to take a slightly different approach to others, and may not have the flexibility that they do at the moment. The duty to cooperate, which is something which is stopping a lot of emerging local plans proceeding at the moment, certainly in recent months, that is going to be removed. We're not sure exactly what it's going to be replaced with. Certainly there are a lot of calls for people from a strategic level of planning to be reintroduced, but we're not seeing too much on that yet. What will be of interest to a lot of people is that there will be a new nationally determined and binding housing requirement that local authorities would have to deliver through their local plans. So this really goes back to how things were 10 years ago when regions and counties used to set housing targets or housing requirements for each local authority area. These will now be set nationally rather than each authority having to do what it does at the moment, which is provide their own evidence to find out what their housing need is, and then to decide how much of that they can actually deliver. So there has been a standard method for calculating housing requirements. That's been around for a while. There's been a lot of debate about it. But the idea is that unlike at the moment, this new requirement would be firmly binding. Councils would have to deliver the amount of housing that is proposed, and we're told that this will factor in land constraints like the green belt, and also opportunities to use brownfield land, and it will be focused on the areas where affordability pressure is highest. And there has been a separate consultation that's been run on these housing figures, which is leading to some quite significant housing numbers, particularly in large parts of southeast England. So the idea is this is all about the government's long-standing aspiration to deliver 300,000 homes annually, which we haven't come close to for some time, and this is considered to be one way of helping to do this. It will still be up to each local authority as to where they are going to allocate this housing, and that will be in their local plans. And also, crucially, no change is proposed to Greenbelt policy. So as I mentioned, there is a separate consultation being run alongside the white paper. That finished a little bit before the main white paper consultation. But the figures in that show that in Kent, whilst there would be reductions in the number of houses needing to be provided in Medway and Gravesham, and to a much lesser extent Thanet, everywhere else we're seeing increases. Dover 115% above their current standard method requirements. Dartford, again, 86%, Tunbridge and Malling, 71%. So these are some really pretty big increases in over what are already quite large housing numbers in some of these areas. And there's also a similar pattern, as I mentioned, in much of the rest of southeast England as well. So at the moment, councils have to demonstrate that they have a 5-year supply of housing sites. That requirement is proposed to be dropped, so that everything really concentrates on the number of houses that are actually being delivered. And there is a housing delivery test at the moment where councils have to show that they are actually delivering the number of houses that are required in their area, and that will be maintained, and that is what the government wants to concentrate on. And the presumption in favour of sustainable development will also very much continue. But one theme of the white paper is it's not as definitive as it is sometimes being reported. And actually, although they're setting out various ideas, there are also large parts of the white paper where it also discusses alternatives and says, well, actually, we might not go down this road. We may do things in a different way. And this is a key example, really, where the government's saying, well, actually, maybe we won't tell councils how many housing numbers they have to provide. Maybe local authorities could still decide it in much the same way at the moment. And we know that politically, particularly in South East England, it's the housing requirements that are being suggested are hugely unpopular with many local councillors. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out. Automatic planning permissions is something you may have read a bit about in press coverage of the white paper. It's a much trailed point, but the reality is a little bit more complex. So the idea is in growth areas where there are allocations for, this is for your large settlement expansions, as I mentioned before, an allocation in the local plan will effectively be an outline planning permission. So what you won't need to do in those areas, if you have a local plan allocation that says you can expand this town by 400 dwellings in this particular location, you don't need to then go in and get a subsequent outline planning permission, which makes a lot of sense and should speed things up to an extent where we've seen difficulties in various areas where allocations have been made and then outline planning permissions, planning applications have been refused, often by a slightly different administration that's come in since the local plan was adopted. Now, detailed permissions will still be required in all of these areas, so it isn't quite the free-for-all that is sometimes being suggested. So this may be some sort of reformed but unspecified reserved matters process in presumably a broadly similar way to at the moment. It may be a local development order. These already exist but are not widely used at the moment, and this is where effectively a local authority can grant a local development order for a particular area, which effectively says that permission will be automatically granted within that area, providing that you meet certain design and other constraints. Or it could be a development consent order for the very largest sites. So this is something that is currently reserved only for big infrastructure projects like trunk roads and motorways and airports, power stations, that sort of thing. It's something that DHA have been involved with on a number of sites. And this is a completely different process that's really taken out of the local authority's hands. It's decided by a panel of inspectors. The local authorities are involved, they are consulted, they appear at the examination, but the ultimate decision is made by a panel of inspectors. And that is something which the government is looking as an option on these very large new developments. In renewal areas, which as I said is most sort of existing towns and cities, there will be a presumption in favour of development, but you will still need to get planning permission. Now, it may be that redevelopment of certain building types could get automatic planning permission in much the same way that the government's been quite keen on introducing various prior approvals at the moment. There could be some sort of faster application route, again, not too much detail on this, or again, local or neighbourhood development orders. So certainly the government is setting out ways in which planning permissions may be easier to come by, but really until we see the details, it's difficult to know exactly how different that will be. In both of these areas, you can still bring forward other proposals, but planning permission will always be required. In protected areas, it seems, broadly speaking, that things won't be a lot different to how they are now, i.e. in these areas, proposals will be judged against what is in the NPPF. So if you have a site that is in the countryside, so long as you still comply with the NPPF, it may well be that the planning permission should still be forthcoming. The only caveat to that is a lot of this depends on exactly what they do change with legislation, and we're used to the Town and Country Planning Act at the moment, and the way that is phrased. It could be that tweaks to the wording of those sort of documents do make a difference on how easy it would be for permissions to come forward. But again, that's one to watch, but doesn't seem to be quite as simple as is sometimes suggested. So design is a key part of the white paper, and the aim is very clearly set out in the white paper to create beautiful and sustainable places. There is a theme of standardization again here. The government's looking to increase the use of design codes and pattern books, the latter of which have been said to help build places like Bath and Belgravia and Bourneville in the past, and that's really what the government is sort of aiming at here. So there will be a national design guide and a national model design code, and these will set out detailed parameters for development in different locations. So the National Design Guide was published in October last year, and that illustrates how well-designed places that are beautiful, enduring, and successful can be achieved in practice. But the government wants applicants to be clear about what good design is to allow decisions on design to be fast-tracked. And that means introducing specific standards. And so the National Model Design Code, which is to be published at some point this autumn, that will supplement the guide and will set out more detailed parameters for development in different locations. But there will also be local design codes, and these will need to be produced with public input, what the white paper describes as genuine community involvement rather than meaningless consultation. But these will have real bite by being binding. And the idea is they will use evidence of what is popular and characteristic locally. There will be a new national expert body to help advise local authorities. And there will also be a role for Homes England in this. And the government is looking for good design to be fast-tracked. The NPPF will be updated to expect swift approval where local design codes are complied with. Each local authority is going to be required to have its own chief officer for design and placemaking. They're quite where they're going to get all of these from. It will be interesting to see. The idea is that councils should automatically permit proposals for high quality developments where they reflect local character and preferences. Again, that sounds great. Though quite how you automate what good design is and isn't, I suspect is a question that's a lot of authorities are going to battle with. Master plans are going to be required for larger schemes in advance of detailed and reserved matters, and perhaps at the local stage. A local plan stage. If they are to be produced at that stage, this is going to be an awful lot of work for councils to do in a very short timescale, because one of the things speeding up the local plan system is that the government wants local plans to be complete within 36 months, which is an incredibly fast timescale. The first the first 6 months or so of this 36 months will be dedicated to a call for sites, where, as happens at the moment, councils go out and ask people for what land might be available that could go into the local plan. The council then has a year to put the whole of their local plan together and submit it to the Secretary of State, and that really is an incredibly fast timescale. If they are looking to be putting together individual master plans for individual sites within that time, as well as identifying the sites in the first place and agreeing which sites should be allocated and which shouldn't, that just sounds incredibly ambitious. And then finally, the government is looking to introduce more permitted development rights to allow popular forms of development to be approved quickly and easily. So anything that can help the consistency of good design standards, I think, should be welcomed. But who is best to decide what good design is? And I think that is the difficulty here. It's all very subjective. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And indeed, what works on one site doesn't necessarily work well on another. Design guidance, which is properly prepared by people who know what they're talking about, is likely to be helpful. But the idea of strict rules that can't be broken does concern me a little bit more. Design is very subjective. So certainly if there's any architects in the room, I'd be keen to know at the end what you think about this. Will community-driven design codes improve quality, or will it just result in repetitive and/or pastiche schemes? And that's certainly the concern. There's a big drive towards energy efficiency and sustainability in the white paper, as you might expect, looking to get to net zero by 2050. Ideas including all new streets being tree lined, lower CO2 emissions than current levels, a lot of what we've heard and come to expect over the last few years. So I want to move on to digitisation. This is another key theme, and I think actually there's some quite good ideas in here about just modernising the planning system. So to directly quote from the white paper, the validation of applications should be integrated with the submission of the application so that the right information is provided at the start of the process. Well, my experience, validation is already very much integrated with the submission of applications, and local authorities are usually very happy to refuse applications if they decide that they don't have the full suite of information that they need. So there are various references in the white paper to machine reading. So I think this is probably the direction they're trying to head in here, of really trying to computerize a lot of the validation process. Is this a good thing or not? Again, it will depend on the detail, but I do question what real advantages is being gained here. But it isn't just about validation. The white paper refers to methods of automating routine processes, such as deciding whether schemes are within the rules or not. The government wants to see shorter and more standardized planning applications with reduced amounts of information to be submitted. And in many ways, I think that probably sounds right, in the sense that the amount of information required to be submitted with an application has increased massively over the 23 years or so I've been working in planning, and I'm not necessarily sure it's led to better decisions. So to some extent, that may be right. There will be a national data standard for smaller applications. No explanation on exactly what that means at the moment, but one thing that is in the white paper, it says for larger schemes, things like planning statements shouldn't be longer than 50 pages long. Sounds a rather worthwhile aim, even if it is a slightly arbitrary measure. And there's a call for data-rich application registers so that information could be shared at a national scale. And again, I can see how that could actually be quite useful if it's set up properly, having searchable databases of applications across the country to see how things have been done elsewhere. That does make sense. There's a proposal for digital templates for site notices. Again, no detail on exactly how these will work, but moving this sort of thing to the digital world is, again, quite sensible. Certainly my local authority sends me details of applications that are near my house on a weekly email, which is more helpful to me and for most people, I think, than sticking notices up on lampposts. So decision making should be faster, more certain, with firm deadlines and the greater use of digital technology. This has been the holy grail for some time now. The trouble, though, with firm deadlines is that whilst we all want decisions yesterday, if deadlines are too firm and inflexible, they can actually slow the system down and not speed it up, which is certainly our experience when a few years ago, quite a few councils were very hard line on determining applications within the 13 weeks, and which usually meant that if everything wasn't resolved at week 12, it simply got refused, or you got encouraged to withdraw the application and start again, and that's the concern. There's a call for national standard conditions to cover most issues. Again, that sounds fairly sensible, though there'll always need to be some adaptability for individual sites and areas. One thing that won't go down so well with a lot of local councillors is that the white paper is encouraging delegated decisions to be made, especially where the principle of development has already been established. So the idea is, if you've got a local plan allocation or you've got an outline permission, technical planning officers are, the government says, better positions than members to assess the actual details of those submissions And at the time of housing crisis, again, this does seem to be quite a sensible measure. Too often, and seemingly increasingly over recent months, schemes that have been in line with a local plan have ended up being refused, not because of the details, but simply because politicians want to re-examine the principle again in the face of local opposition, which simply wastes time, delays sites coming forward, and costs applicants money. So that does seem to be a fairly sensible thing to do. Where committees refuse schemes that are later granted at appeal, there will be an automatic refund of the planning fee. This, I think, has the potential to be harder hitting to councils than the current threats of costs, because at the moment, where it's legitimate to do so, committees can refuse applications on design grounds, knowing it's a subjective decision, where costs are less likely to be awarded. There's a proposal for automatic refunds for late decisions. Where have we heard that one before? Overall, fewer appeals are expected because of the increased certainty about the prospects arising from new local plans. I'm not sure it will work out exactly like that. One thing that won't change is that the Secretary of State is still going to be able to call in applications for their own determination. This is something that doesn't happen that often, but where it does, it can cause huge delays. And of course, that decision is only made after the local authority has determined the application in the first place. So that's certainly something I think needs looking at again. So finally, the digitisation of local plans. The government's really looking for local plans to be presented in a very different way to now. They're looking for them to be interactive, map-based and standardised and based on a national model template. So the idea is that plans and mapping will be openly made available online, allowing other people to access local plan data quite easily, which again sounds to be a pretty sensible idea. Certainly our GIS team at DHA can very easily map data on everything from flood risk to public rights of way, ecological constraints, but local plan allocations and data is very difficult to get hold of digitally in most authorities, and usually has to be drawn onto our systems by hand. So yes, please to that one. The idea of making planning information easier to find and understand, and the government wants local plan information to happen and appear where discussions are happening, like in social networks. Plans are to be shorter. As I said, they're simply setting out allocations. The general policies will all be set at a national level. And neighbourhood plans are still to be retained. The government says these are an important means of community input, and they will be supporting communities to make better use of digital tools to help them provide their local plans. Finally, just a few words on infrastructure. This is a key point for a lot of people. It's a hugely complex area, and I don't propose to go into it in huge detail because this really does warrant a session in its own right. But there is a proposal for a new infrastructure levy. This will effectively be a merging of the existing community infrastructure levy system, which is in place in some local authorities, but not all, and Section 106 agreements, which are used widely. And the idea is that a charge will be placed on the final value of a development, and that will be based on the applicable rate at the time that planning permission is granted. But the payments, whereas at the moment, SIL payments tend to be made pretty much immediately at the start of development, they will now be required prior to occupation. And another change here is that they will be used to secure affordable housing too, as a different way of delivering affordable housing. That's an extremely brief overview. It is a very complex area, and if that's of interest to you, I certainly recommend seeking out some of the other seminars and papers on that, because it's well worth a more detailed look. So what happens next? Well, as I mentioned, the consultation has recently finished, and So the government is now looking to see what ideas it's going to take forward and in what form. And there have been several quite high-profile responses. Certainly, we know that politically, some of the ideas haven't gone down too well with some local politicians, but you may say, well, actually, a lot of them were designed not to go down particularly well with local politicians in some cases, looking at centralizing ideas a little bit more. So it will be interesting to see exactly what happens next. One thing that may happen sooner rather than later that isn't in the white paper itself, but was in the separate consultation that ran alongside it, is that there is a proposal that temporarily, at least, the threshold for affordable housing should be lifted from around 10 units in most places at the moment to 40 or 50 units, which would mean that schemes of up to 40 and 50 units may not need to provide affordable housing. Now, we don't know A, that this is definitely going to come in, and B, exactly when. The rumor is that it will be sooner rather than later. But that is certainly something to watch if you have a development that fits into that category. So thank you very much. That's a quick overview of the white paper, which I hope you have found interesting. If anyone has any questions, I would certainly be happy to try and answer them now. If you have any questions, please feel free to put your hand up or unmute and ask away. I can't actually see the chat function at the moment to see whether anyone has put any on there. So Liz, if there are any on there, if you could pass those through to me.
Hi, Jonathan. We've got a question from Matt Dean. He's asking what the timeline is on white paper going live.
So yes, the answer, Matt, is that we don't know. There's quite a bit of legislation that would be required to bring some of these ideas into force. The government hasn't set any clear idea on the timescale for these. I think most people think that these ideas wouldn't come into force before next summer. That's probably the sort of timescale that we are talking about. But as with most government projects at the moment, it's really in their hands as to when they bring forward legislation that's required because there are some significant changes in here that will require changes to the Planning Act or potentially a new Planning Act altogether, and that will take some time to work through Parliament. So yeah, really at the moment we don't know, but I would be surprised if there were significant changes before next summer. Any further questions from anyone? In that case, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope that's been useful and informative.
Sorry, Jonathan, you've got another one coming from Chris Lockhead. Have you got any flavour of what transition period the government may put on enacting these changes, like the MPPF changes? I'm thinking about impact on local plans, Sevenoaks, TNBC, Maidstone and Swale.
Again, no, they haven't made that clear at the moment. The one thing that they have said is that local authorities who are in the process of putting together local plans should carry on with them and get on with them and shouldn't use the white paper as an excuse to delay. And we're seeing mixed results on that. There certainly are some local authorities who are very early on in their process and are choosing to put the brakes on for now. But I think most local authorities who are at any sort of advanced stage with their local plans are very much continuing with that now, because I think the reality is anything under the new system is it's still going to take a long time to actually bring these things into reality. So if you're anywhere near close to having a local plan ready for submission, or even Reg 18 or Reg 19 at the moment, it probably is best just to be carrying on with that. I'm sure there will be some sort of transitional arrangement put in place, as has usually happened before, but no details at the moment of exactly what that will be.
Excellent. And a second one from Rex Cowell. Hi, Jonathan. Could you outline what permitted development rights the government has proposed?
Goodness, yeah, that's probably a session in itself as well. In terms of, there's been a whole suite of permitted development changes that have happened, as you may well know, over the last 5 years or so. There is no detail in the white paper about how this would be expanded any further. Really, the information I've given you in the presentation is pretty much all that's in there. Just talking about investigating ways of expanding these in certain places, though it's difficult to know really what is left to be able to do that in any meaningful way. One thing that has happened this year, the government is starting to now to move towards certain permitted development rights that allow redevelopment of sites rather than just change of use of buildings. So there is potentially room for expansion there. I think the difficulty with that, and we're seeing this in the permitted development rights that have already come out this year, is once you start doing that, actually the list of things you have to deal with as part of your prior approval application are so complex that it may as well be largely it may already be a planning permission anyway, because of the sort of level of detail that you're having to look at. So yeah, no firm detail, but again, that's something I'm sure we'll see more on over the coming months.
Another one, sorry, Jonathan, because I don't think you can see these, can you?
No, I can't.
So from
Okay.
Norman Hinks, hi, Jonathan, where do you see MMC fitting into this?
I certainly see MMC being a big driver going forward. So certainly we are seeing it increasingly on larger infrastructure projects and schools and hospitals and things like that, but increasingly in housing. There are a number of organisations who are working that up at the moment and working up some really quite good MMC products. And I'm sure that with the number of houses that need to be delivered, and particularly if there is standardization and design codes that are compatible with MMC products, then I can certainly see that being a big part of development going forward. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time this morning. I hope that has been useful and informative, and look forward to speaking to you soon. If you want to discuss any of these things in more detail, please get in touch with me or any of my colleagues at DHA, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you.